Patrick Tipton from Portrayal TV, going to show you how to remove a World War II Jeep T84 transmission in under an hour. The time is 4 o'clock. Let's see if we can do it even with filming. Most of us don't have a lift, so we'll do it off the floor. I use jack stands, raise the front of the Jeep up about 6 inches to give me a little more room to work underneath there. The jack goes under the pumpkin for the passenger side jack stand. You see me installing it there. And you lift on the other side. You can see under the shock tower, get your jack stand in, and there you go. My shop floor's got a lot of dirt built in like most Jeeps, so I use a tarp, slide it underneath the Jeep. It keeps me a little cleaner in this process, makes it easier to find parts, and it also makes it easier for things to slide around. Install a bottle jack on the rear edge of the engine oil pan. I use a piece of wood to spread the load. It's going to allow me to support the engine once the transmission gets removed, and also gives me some adjustments when I need to align things. There are different mufflers on different eras of Jeep. For the early Jeeps, they have this side exhaust here. I like to remove the muffler. This is not an original factory setup, so yours may look a little different, but get that muffler out of the way. It'll make life easier later on. The correct tool for this job is a transmission jack. So I made mine out of a little small light duty floor jack by welding a cross member onto it that I can vice grip to the skid plate of this World War II Jeep transmission transfer case. Don't try to do it without making some kind of modification. I recommend you make something like what I've done here, get a proper transmission jack. It makes it a lot easier, and it really comes in handy when you start trying to reassemble, and we'll talk about that on another video. There are 6 bolts you can remove with 9/16 wrenches to hold the transmission cross member. In this case, I did not have the jack in early enough here, so the bolts on the side are kind of stuck in. Get that transmission jack in first, and you should be able just to pop these out. It's hard on the bolts that way. I also use just a little bucket, plastic bucket, and I throw all the bolts and parts that I remove from the underside of the Jeep into that. We won't use them again until we reinstall. You need to remove the bolt that holds the skid plate to the frame at this point as well, or you will find that the transmission won't come down when we start dropping it down in just a second. In order to remove the clutch cross shaft, you need to remove 2 bolts that hold the outer bracket on the frame. They're 1/2 inch socket. Will take them off. You see I'm using my little electric socket or ratchet. Makes quick work of it. So remove those from the outside. You can now see the brackets moved a little bit off the center of the holes. You need to remove the clutch cable itself. Usually there's a cotter key there. This one's been modified a little bit, so it's just a pin that you pull out, like a linch pin, and then you got to slide the entire cable forward and unhook it from the clutch fork. I put all these parts back together again and throw them in my bucket. On the outside, the clutch pedal itself is connected with a rod, and that has got a cotter key in it. Remove it. Go easy when you start bending cotter keys. When you put all this back together again, it'll make it easier on the next guy who takes it all apart. So once that's out, you can pop that rod out. You see me hooking it onto the frame. That's so it doesn't get in the wrong spot, and I don't have to take the front off too. And I'll show you when we put this thing back together again. So there's the bracket. Put the bolts that go back in there to it. I just thread them back in real quick, and that way when I go to reinstall it, the bolts are where they're supposed to be. The engine stay cable is held in place with a 9/16 fine thread nut, and there should be 2 of them on there. In this case there weren't. See, I'm using a deep socket to get that out. Makes quick work of the whole thing, and a lot of times they're going to be tight. You might have to get a pair of pliers and hold the other side to keep it from spinning. Again, I just put everything back together again and slide the entire thing forward into the sort of front of the bell housing, and it just stays out of the way. You got to pop that clutch spring off. I find, again, that needle nose pliers, these long ones, they're cheapos and they're really abused, but that'll pop it right off. This parking brake cable's not really set up correctly. I think it's a CJ. That's why it's so long. It should be a little shorter. I don't think it actually engages, but you got to remove that little bracket there. I put the bolt back into the transfer case, and then the actual business end of it where it's doing the work, in this case, has got a 7/16 bolt in there, two nuts locking it down so it can kind of move. It works. I don't believe that's correct. I think it's supposed to have a linchpin kind of thing in there, but anyway, it works. So take it back apart, put it all back together again. So I'm not looking for these bolts when I go to reinstall the transmission. Don't forget to remove the parking brake return spring. This one's not the correct one, but get it out of the way.
I want to personally invite you to become a member of ShopTime. Why, you ask? Let me show you.
Definitely going to take a little time to fix.
And we'll show you how it works when you get it all back together again. It's not...
Look at this slack reel.
Membership's only $4.99 a month, so click the link below and start your 7-day, no obligation, free trial. We look forward to having you on board. Remember, keep those corners square. We'll see you in the shop.
We're going to remove the propeller shafts or drive shafts from the actual differential side, and the U-joints are held in place with two U-bolts. The Ford style has a tab that locks those bolts in place. Willys, you can see right here, is using lock washers. Put them all back together again and hopefully drop it correctly in the bucket so you can find it easily when you go to reinstall. Once you get those U-bolts off, you can pull the drive shaft and sort of collapse it a little bit because it moves, and remove it actually from the differential itself. And when you do that, you see there it goes. Take those two little needle bearing cups off because they're going to fall off and the needle bearings are going to go everywhere and you're going to be really unhappy. Do the front side the same way. Again, there's your U-bolt, and you can spin the front because it's elevated off of the ground, makes it easy to work on, and you'll get those pieces out. Now you'll watch when I remove this drive shaft, you see we lost one of those cups because it's kind of stuck in the yoke itself. But I keep front and back needle bearing cups separated and place them on top of the fender for safekeeping while we do the rest of this work. Don't forget to remove the speedometer cable or you'll trash it. Sometimes it's really tight and you have to use channel locks. I have a small pair of channel locks that works. This one I could get by my fingers. So remove it and you're going to see me sort of tuck it into the frame right here to get it out of the way so something else don't have to worry about. I've got both the transmission transfer case and the engine supported at this point with two different jacks. I'm going to slowly lower both of them down, and you can see the transmission crossmember coming down. I want to get it about 3 or 4 inches down because I need to remove the transfer case levers next, and I have some other access issues, so this is going to help me out. The transfer case shift lever pin is held in place with that little set screw that I'm working on here. Note the hole in the middle, that's to be safety wired. This one's not, but it should be safety wired to the transfer case itself. And you remove the pin, you're just working it back and forth. This one's coming out pretty easy. Sometimes it takes a little more force than that, and you have to knock it with a drift from the other side, at least start it. Once that's out, I didn't have the rubber boot removed, but I removed it off of one side, popped it out. There are two anti-rattle clips that go on those transfer case levers, and they just fell down below, so make sure you get those too. This is one of the less enjoyable parts of this job, but once you figure out the angles, it's not terrible. These are 5/8" bolts. There are 4 of them that hold the transfer case transmission to the actual bell housing. And it's just hard. You don't have great access, but once you get them started, you can go and use your fingers. They're kind of long. Get them out. You have to do that one from the bottom. You also have to do the lower one. This is passenger side from the bottom as well. And again, they should be snug. These were reasonably tight. And then just get those fingers in there, and you'll get some cramps by the time you get them out, but you do it. For the passenger side, that's the only way to do it. On the driver's side, I have a long extension with a little joggle at the end of it. You can see that the actual socket itself can move. It doesn't, sort of like a universal, it's just mildly universal, and you see it comes right out with the electric ratchet, and you pop the top one out. This is the bottom one, and it's out. So now we're basically free. This is the whole removal sequence with no editing, because I think it's important to see that it's a little bit of a struggle. I did narrate this when I was underneath there, but it did not come out very well. So let me do it again. I'm moving all the tools forward of the bottle jack to get them out of the way, and I'm going to start working the transmission back a little bit. It's on the balance point. It is not attached in this particular case, which I don't recommend, but that's how I did it. You're fighting against a little bit the exhaust pipe, which is held on by a clamp in the kind of front of the skid plate, and you're also fighting against the throwout fork, which won't come through the bell housing, and that may or may not make sense to you, but it will just fall out of the way eventually. But you gotta kind of overcome a little spring tension on the clutch fork itself, and the throwout bearing. There's a spring that returns it. Those are kind of fighting against you, and you'll see me moving this up and down a little bit to try to get the angle right. You see I've got it mostly separated, and I'm working at again, the exhaust pipe is clamped to the front of the skid plate, and that very shortly is going to have to be removed. Now, in this case, they had already taken the clamp out, so it's just kind of jammed in there a little bit. They did some modifications on this, and that front drive shaft is pressing down and kind of holding everything in place. And there you go. So it came all the way out there, and the transmission is largely free. I'm going to let it come down a little further, and I'm trying to be careful again. I want to be nice. You can see right in the top corner, you can see the throwout bearing is coming forward. So I've got that out of the way. There just fell the actual clutch fork. So like I said, it popped out. So we're almost free. And again, what's holding me in right now is that front drive shaft or propeller shaft is laying against the exhaust pipe. And if you have a friend helping you, this is a point where I would have them raise that drive shaft up and kind of move the exhaust pipe a little bit, and you see it's popping up kind of by itself. And now you lowered it down, and pretty much we're out at this point. Everything is clear, and nobody's been harmed in the making of this video. There you go. That's what we would have done a few seconds ago. So I have since modified my transmission jack a little bit, and I clamp the jack to the actual skid plate so it wouldn't have slid off like that. Again, don't try to do this without making something, because it will slide off and you might hurt yourself or the transmission or transfer case, and we don't want that. So there it is. It's been removed. It took me an hour and 10 minutes to do it in this case, but we were filming and we had to do some things a couple of times. So hope that helps, guys.